Hello, welcome to our Dark Days Radio Twitch with another episode of Signal Black, where we'll be talking about Chronicles of Darkness, and in particular we'll be talking about Promethean the Created. Let me bring up my show notes, so we've got everything here. So I've got so many screens going on, it's quite frankly chaotic. So welcome to Signal Black, a Dark Days series introducing and exploring the numerous Chronicles of Darkness 2nd Edition game settings, currently developed by Onyx Path Publishing. In this series, we're the hosts of Dark Days Radio, alongside some guests from Onyx, who are Onyx Path writers, developers, freelancers, etc. We'll discuss the settings and basic mechanics of each game, highlight the types of characters you can play, and essentially what your role-playing experience can be as you explore the game's setting. So I'm one of the regular hosts, Chris, and I'm joined by Crystal.
Hello.
And I'm joined by Chigg, aka Bryce.
Howdy.
And our guest today is Katriel Paige, and I hope I've pronounced that correctly. I should have checked beforehand.
It's Katriel. You got it correct the first time.
Excellent. So, yes, we're going to be talking about Promethean the Created, but before we dive into that, Katriel, would you like to just give a brief, introduction to yourself? What things you've worked on, and essentially other things that are gaming related that people might find quite interesting.
Night Horrors the Tormented, which is the antagonist book for Promethean in the Night Horrors line, was the first assignment I had as a freelancer with Onyx Path. So I have sort of that emotional connection to Promethean, but I've also worked on other Onyx Path licenses, like Dystopia Rising and other games before. I will also occasionally put things up on DM's Guild and Storyteller's Vault. Things that sometimes there's just those ideas that stick in your head. And, for example, it's kind of like if you have a song stuck in your head and you can't get it out unless you tell it to somebody else or sing it. Yeah. That's kind of what I use that for. But I greatly enjoyed writing for Promethean, so I'm looking forward to talking about it today.
Brilliant. Cool. I can't remember if I have actually looked at Night Horrors 2nd Edition. There's just so many books. It's mostly one I really need to delve into some more, and mostly will do at some point after this episode. I'll grab it and go through there and see what terrifying monsters are in there to scare the living daylights out of players. Brilliant. So, with that introduction done, let's kick things off as always. We're going to do a 5-minute kind of sales pitch of what is Promethean the Created. Like, what is the game about? What kind of, and what really sets it apart maybe from the other Chronicles of Darkness games there are, and other RPGs in general. So, who wants to dive into this sales pitch about what this game is?
Right. So, Promethean the Created is a game about becoming a person, becoming a human, and learning what it means to be a person and be a human in a world that does not care for you. You are anathema, you are not a thing that was born, you are a thing that was created. Thus the title. It's very clever that way. It's also a game about the alchemy of the body and the soul, and how you can use one to transform something into the other. You aren't created with a soul, you're created with something that functions like a soul, but is definitely not. And that is why you're feared and hated by others. So you learn to overcome this and grow as an individual. And so, yeah, it's different from a lot of games in that, or a lot of role-playing games rather, in that there is a very not defined path, but there's an end game in sight from the very beginning.
The end sight is doable. The end game is very readily accomplishable, if that makes any sense. It's not this end game is present in the same line as, say, the vampiric Golconda in World of Darkness. It's not this exists possibly. It's very defined in the sense of you can actually accomplish the end game.
Yeah, for certain. I think that is what sets it apart. And I think when it appeared both in first edition, when it first landed with first edition, I think that's what really set it apart from any of the other games, because Vampire the Requiem Is there an end game? I guess there is, if it is being a overly dramatic, melancholy bloodsucker until the end of time, who gets bored of everything and the ennui of being, of your existence. And werewolf, does that have an end game? Maybe in the establishment of your pack, but I mean, there's also the fact that likely you're going to grow old and someone's going to move in on your turf. And for mages, I guess there's kind of an end game if you could ascend to the supernal realms, but that's pretty heady stuff.
Yeah, that's very vague and heavy, and it might not happen. There's really no signposting for it.
But becoming a human is quite a, that's an end game that we can all understand, because that's basically becoming us. So it's easy to understand and define in that way. I mean, the other interesting thing about Promethean the Created, we should say, is that it doesn't really have we can say, because we've compared like vampire and mage, and we'll mostly make comparisons with the other ones, but Promethean Created does not have an analogue to it from the classic World of Darkness.
No.
Which immediately is a selling point.
I think it was one of the first that didn't have a tie-in.
It was
the first.
It is the first, because it was the fourth game that came out, because it came out after Mage and then after it
Vampire.
came Changeling. But I mean, and essentially, you're playing created beings. So what that means is you're playing Frankenstein's monsters type entities, but not just that. That's a very easy to grab reference point in media. But there are.
Do we want to get in? Do we want to get into what you play?
I think we can. I think Chicky gave a pretty good overview of what it's about. It's about trying to become human, and you're basically a vessel for this crucible within which this alchemy is going to occur. So what can we play? Who wants to delve into what we can play? Because you
were going pretty strong there. Chris. Go for it.
Okay, right. So in Promethean, you are playing beings that have been put together, and I use put together in the sense of you can just be a singular body that an alchemist has worked upon to create through alchemical process reanimation, or other Prometheans, we'll get onto that, can also make more Prometheans. And you can also be made from lots of pieces of bodies, so the classic stitched together kind of sense. But the idea that you are playing Frankenstein's monster is that is one type of thing you can play, and those type of things we call lineages in this. So Frankenstein's monster is tied to like the element of like lightning and fire in that sense, and they're tied to a particular humour. In this case, it's the yellow bile, and you're kind of misshapen in that sense, or at least that's kind of generally the idea, and you're stitched together from numerous bodies. So lineages represent a kind of a thematic form of created being. But there's other ones as well. We have did I not list them all down here? I did not. I did.
They're under
so there's the Olgan, which they've been torn apart. They were torn apart and repatched together in a different way, because it's something to do with patching together some bits of souls to create something that's not quite a soul but will be. Their lineage represents or is tied to. Am I right in saying it was Siberian folklore? I can't quite remember.
It's specifically Siberian shamanism, I think, was the inspiration.
Yeah. Yes. And so they're tied to the let's just say kind of like in that classic kind of Eastern like faith systems, the kind of fifth element, as it were, the void, nothingness, or something ephemeral. So they're the group, they're the lineage which has an affinity for dealing with things that are spirit based or ephemeral beings. Then we have, and their humour is ectoplasm, which makes sense. Then we've got the Tamas, which are related to that have their humour is the black bile, and Tammuz relates back to the myth of the golem, which comes from. So Tammuz is in biblical legends, folklore, and is essentially a being that was put into the earth and they came back out. So they is it a golem made of just purely of mud, or was it in the interpretation of this, it was a person that was buried that came back to life?
It depends on which interpretation you're reading. In Jewish folklore, there's a story of the Golem of Prague, which is specifically all clay. That has the writing of one of the names of God, which is the other sort of story that you might hear as an inspiration of the Tammuz, is the Golem of Prague.
Yeah. And they're very earth-based as well. Let's just say the element is earth.
Yes.
Just to toss something in here, they're clay-based.
Yeah.
But so according to the Hebrew Bible, so are people. Yes. That's why golems are made of clay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's of using that sort of earth, and that ties into essentially the habit of using puns everywhere, because the word Adam meant
dust.
Dust, yeah.
Then we have the Sirens, who are the phlegmatic humor, and so Osiris, of course, if you know your Egyptian myths, he was torn apart by Set into 13 pieces, and 12 of which were stitched back together by Isis, and the other part was missing. And so Osiris and his part, the pieces were cast into the Nile. So obviously, therefore, you have the idea of golems, not golems, of Prometheans that are tied to the element of water, which we'll get into with how that relates to everything to do with Geist the Sin Eater, because there's so much crossover potential there. Galateds is the Greek myth of Galatea, who was a statue carved and brought to life, and Galateans or Galateads are the humour of blood and tied to the element of air. And then in Promethean second edition, we get a few extra bits, which are, because second edition refines, I use the word refine, pun intended when we get onto that bit, but refines obviously all the content from first edition, and we get a few other things. So we've got the unfleshed, which are tied to the humour of oil. So the unfleshed is basically your your T-800 Arnie, Terminator, androids, robotics, data, etc., etc. There's also, I mean, even if you look at if you go into like Greek myth, I think there are also examples of, you could say there's also examples of beings that were metallic like that came to life. So isn't there like what's one in the film Jason and the Argonauts, the big Talos, who is a mechanical being, though obviously gargantuan, but you could use the same kind of point of reference for that. Then, so those are your kind of your types. So think of it as clan. Essentially, it's the theme. It gives you some inherent benefits, which they're very good at. There's another one which we've not got listed on there, and I can't remember how well it's covered in second edition, but you've got like the
nuclear ones.
The nuclear ones, which I freaking love. The nuclear ones. So again, the idea of the power of the atom being infused into beings and reanimating them and creating monsters.
You see a little bit more of that in the Night Horrors book, simply because of how they are created.
Yeah, it's pretty horrific.
It's pretty horrific.
Yeah. Anyone want to jump in on any other points that's interesting about any of these about these lineages? What makes them interesting, or what maybe you've got a favourite?
I really like how each lineage has its own things that it's good at, and it has slight drawbacks to them. And one of the drawbacks for the Galateans specifically is that they mimic, I don't want to say that they mimic people, but they're really good because they use the doll motif, the statue motif. They like being around people. And one of the drawbacks can be that they have to be within range of hearing someone else's voice.
Okay.
to be able to rest, which is an interesting thing. Makes for great road trip scenes. But it's just kind of like, it's thematically appropriate. The lineages have their own theme to it, but there's always that sort of media inspiration. And with the Galateids is you have the dolls or the statues.
Yeah.
That works really nicely. Yeah. The theme is much tighter in Promethean, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something we should, with regard to theme being a lot tighter. I think second edition obviously tightens a lot of the game themes and moods and the goals of it, and lays things out a bit more concretely rather than so abstractly. I think we'll get into that as well a bit later. Okay, so that's kind of the type of things you can play in the sense of how you've been created. You can play Prometheans that have no specific lineage. Alchemists, demiurges have numerous ways of creating Prometheans, alchemical processes that they discover, and so they can create Prometheans that may mix and match certain things together. So what we'll move on to then next is refinements, because these are not really like covenants. They're certainly not like... They may be a little bit like tribes in Werewolf, the Forsaken, and perhaps maybe a little bit like the paths in Mage the Awakening. But these are really definitely philosophical paths. They're not political factions that you would join, and you may be on one of these refinements, but you may not know by name that you're on this refinement. So when we say, I'm on the refinement which is called Ferrum, your character is on that, but they may not ever vocalize and say, I'm on the refinement of Ferrum. They may not even say the word refinement. They just inherently know they're on this philosophical path that leads them somehow down their pilgrimage closer to the new dawn, which is becoming human.
Have we defined pilgrimage?
No, we've not defined
No, we haven't.
Yeah, this is actually pretty important. We should mention
It's a fairly important part of the game. So the game is about becoming a person, right? You don't just do that by sitting around and eating Doritos and watching Netflix or anything. There are steps that every Promethean, every Promethean has steps that they need to take to become a human. It's not always the same steps for every person or every one of the created, but the path that they go down to become human is referred to as the pilgrimage.
Yeah,
that's basically it. There's steps along the way that they have to do, and they themselves might not know consciously that these are things that they have to do, but in their little heart of hearts, they know, hey, I have to do this. This is something that I just have to do.
There's some pull toward the pilgrimage, and the steps are actually pretty well defined for endgame steps, but obviously their storyteller kind of support of how exactly they can look to that individual Promethean.
Yeah, so what refinements do we have? So 5 of these are the ones which Prometheans can follow without needing to be instructed and inducted into them, because they're essentially just a way of thinking, and you conclude this is how you want to proceed with your existence, and the way you will you believe leads you to becoming human, or at least leads you down your pilgrimage. So there's Aurum, which is the path of gold, which is basically to become human, try and be human. Even if that means you don't quite understand why you're doing it. You feel that performing certain actions like regular people will mean you become more human. It's the fake it until you make it process.
I had a different take on that one.
I had a different take, yeah, because some of the refinements, if you put it that way, are pretty similar.
Yeah.
Aurum is by making friends, by seeing a different array of people.
Yeah, Aurum is becoming a human by interacting with humans.
With humans.
Yeah, but by interacting with humans, then you'll understand better what things to do to fit in with them.
Right.
Whether you understand
it's
those things or not is another matter.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And you could argue one of the other refinements is a refinement of that, which is Phosphorus, which is make it until you make it.
Then there's cuprum, which is copper, which is to become more human through self-improvement and seclusion. So that's interesting in the sense that in some respects you're focusing quite a bit on what you more internally, as in that you can only become human by improving your body, by improving your soul, or your or how you think. But you can't be distracted from people, right?
So cuprum, as I read it, was focusing on your place as a human in nature,
right?
Yeah.
Not by the other examples that you gave, because those are actually coming up.
Oh, okay, right. That's why it's important to go through these, because a lot. I feel some things in second edition have become a lot more specific.
I think I was actually about to say each refinement in second edition has some sample roles in that refinement. And I believe it's about 3 each, 2 or 3 each, and that actually does help. Because not only would a Promethean maybe not necessarily know the name of the refinement, but they would know essentially what the archetype of the role is. Like soldier is a role.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more easy to understand what the refinements are through those roles, both for the storyteller, player, and for the character that you have.
I see them as more like the individuals who choose to like live off the grid, to just become. Yes, yeah, survivalists and stuff like that.
Hermits, not survivalists. I mean, yes, survivalists also, but
both actually fall under that refinement. Yeah. Like it depends on how you go back to the roles, and that's why I was mentioning the roles. Is the roles really help with how these can present? Because there might be somebody who's much more of a hermit, but then there's also somebody who might be more of a survivalist, and kind of goes in a different direction with it.
And then the next one is ferrum, which is iron, which is what then?
that is where you focus on the physical body.
That's what
you try to be.
Body, yeah.
I'm pretty sure this is a pumping iron.
Adonis.
Because they're ferrum, which is iron, and they're trying to get, they're working on their physical form. So it's definitely a pumping iron, but no one's denying it, so I must be right. All right.
Well, yes, you can. But I guess the analogy there with iron is also the fact that is how do you get from iron to making things like steel and so forth?
Yes.
You're hammering it to change the content of it. You're forging it. You're manipulating it, and that is a very physical process. Whereas I would say with cuprum, I mean, I guess that's a less physical. Maybe it's considered less physical because you're existing in the world around you, and it's changed you. Like, could you say with like copper? It's copper has an oxidized surface that only gets when it sits in situ. I don't know.
That's actually what I think of when I think of cuprum and copper. I think of copper as a conduit, and I think of oxidation. So I think of that.
Yeah.
Where if you leave it, it's a path to other paths, but it's also like if you just leave it for a while, is that meditation aspect of the oxidation process. Yeah.
Interesting. So ferrum in that sense then is fairly obvious what it's about.
Strength.
Yeah.
Of physical strength.
Physical body, physical form, yeah.
Okay, so then we've got plumbum, which is lead. So this is to become human by learning about Prometheans in general. So how can we be more specific about that?
This is, I believe in second, they actually say that this is not so much the default, so much as kind of the easiest one for people to start with, because learning about other Prometheans, the character might be wanting to learn more about themselves and their own condition. There is an analog to this in other game lines, but it's the easiest and the hardest because out of the game lines, Prometheans relatively are rare if you're running a crossover campaign.
Yeah. So
how do you learn about the Promethean condition? Well, that means you have to find them. Good luck. So it's a little bit easy to get into as a player, and run this as a storyteller, but in terms of, are you going to encounter other Prometheans on the way? Maybe not. Okay, well, how then will you learn about other Prometheans? Yourself? Be self-reflective? Maybe. It's a very interesting refinement, the way that it's presented in the book.
Yeah. And
it's also the most variable based on the narrative.
It also says, like, you know, the things that they get up to is not just about learning about other Prometheans and their path, their pilgrimage, but also leaving behind what you've learned so others can learn from you. So but yeah, I guess it is the easiest one to fall into for any Promethean naturally, because it's
ones that I guess it's the easiest one. That's not.
I guess that's why it's lead, because lead is pretty much the most stable element there is, because everything coalesces upon being lead. Okay, and then we've got Stanum, which is
the path of hatred.
Path of hatred. So this is kind of about understanding. Is this about understanding that life is pain? Is this
No, that's not how I read it. It's more about giving into your torment.
It's giving into that destructive impulse, because the inner fire that animates Prometheans can go either way, right? It's the creative fire, but also it's the destructive fire. And emotion is still, like, anger is still an emotion.
Yeah.
So it's still teaching you things, but you're definitely kind of doing the dark path of hate, anger, and what it can teach you.
And yeah, it's obviously it's part of the human condition is, you know, emotion,
despair, anger,
and raw anger, yes. So, you know, kind of, I guess it's kind of like that thing of, you know, while you may, it could be easy for a Promethean to go, these emotions and this anger is what makes me a monster, but that would be denying and then trying to deny yourself that, but then realizing that by denying that, you're also kind of denying elements of yourself already, which are actually quite human, that you do have, you know, rages, you do feel pain and torment in that sense, and just as regular people do. So understanding that does help you understand people.
My take on these last two, Plumbum and Stanum, is that they are not ones that most Prometheans will start on. They're ones that a Promethean who starts on Aurum or Cuprum or Ferrum fall to when they don't make much progress. One is when they fall and they get depressed about it. They're upset that they didn't make very much progress. They fall to lead. One is where they don't make progress and they get pissed about it. And they fall to Stanum. I could be reading, that could just be my interpretation of it.
I have a different take, and some of it is just more because of second edition. If you stop and if you are in a role for too long, any role on any refinement, it's a problem. You have to keep moving. So I think that's how they addressed it. So I think some of that might be personal interpretation and kind of where that chronicle is going. It could definitely be presented as they are sort of falling back in a way. And you could definitely run it like that.
And that's an interesting point, actually, that characters don't stay on the refinement. You know, the idea is that you don't just stay on one refinement. You
don't stay on one the entire time.
You will hop between them, which is, again, quite interesting when you compare to other game lines where, you know, your character might well just stay there a Carthian, and they're going to be a Carthian until they get kicked out and they hunger for more power and go screw it, and they become a capitalist and join the Invictus. Right, so go on, Crystal. Sorry.
I was going to say, I kind of like how you are meant to be jumping around because it ties into the whole alchemical theme too.
Yeah.
By playing around with all of the elements and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, so then there's these complex refinements, which are the ones that require some instruction and tutelage. What do we have here? So we've got Aes, which is the refinement of bronze, which, again, it makes sense why it's a more complicated one, because bronze is an alloy of two other elements. So what are we doing here? We're
helping other Prometheans.
Yeah, which we're helping others. So
which is why it's an alloy.
Yeah. It's very much a support refinement in the sense of you're helping other Prometheans or even just helping others in general. Maybe for crossover games, there's some potential there, but it's very much, you're helping other Prometheans as well.
And that's why they have the other title of they're the sentries. They're the ones that look after others and look out
everyone else. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then we've got Argentum, which is, as has been highlighted, this is the crossover one. This is the crossover refinement.
Out of all the other ones, out of all the refinements, this is the easiest to cross over. Yes.
This is basically, I'm a monster, and how do I understand my existence? I understand it by understanding other monsters out there and understanding how they're not human anymore, or barely human, or changed from being a human, or if they're mages, how they're more than human. And that's a really the reason why this is cool is because then you can get those really deep philosophical arguments between a Promethean, and especially with other characters like changelings whose souls are a shadow of their former selves, with sin eaters who have a hitchhiker along for the ride with them, or for vampires who have clearly have what I like to think is a desiccated soul, because they still have a soul of sorts, but it's not as not burning brightly, as it were.
Yeah. It's almost visual in a way, like it's there, but it's like a husk of what it was.
Yeah. So. Oh, that's it. It's clearly curiosity and the one that wants to interact with other groups and learn about what it means to be a monster. I also think they're the ones that mostly might look at beasts and start thinking, I really freaking hate you. Because beasts are all about when they try to be friendly with other splats, it's like, be the monster, and it's like, I don't know. Maybe a Promethean would like that, and maybe they wouldn't. It kind of feels anathema to the pilgrimage. Then we've got Kobalas, so Cobalt. So this is about what? This is become more human by studying how your disquiet affects other humans. And this
is very much the study of disquiet, which is a whole other thing, because disquiet is how a Promethean affects their environment and the people around them. Yeah,
it's a kind of it's that uncanny valley kind of reaction that humans have to Prometheans, but
this entire game line is Uncanny Valley the game, which is amazing. Yes, that's exactly what disquiet is,
and it manifests again depending upon the type of Promethean you are. That disquiet will manifest in different ways in people, and if you stay in one place too long, disquiet grows and essentially taints where you are and the people around you, and creates what's called the wasteland. So Kobalas, on this refinement, is understanding why humans feel disquiet, why it occurs, and essentially understanding why Prometheans feel not part of the world, why people think Prometheans don't fit in the world, because if you understand that connection, then you understand how to become part of the world and blend in, essentially. So that's fun. Then we've got Mercurius. So this is the refinement of Quicksilver and of Pyrrhus. So this is really about understanding in a very
This is the spiritual one.
Yeah,
this is the more spiritual one. Yeah, because you're studying Pyrrhus, which is the creative spark.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more philosophical. I really enjoy that one, but that's me personally.
It's really into the philosophy of alchemy, isn't it? And how that relates to the soul, what the world's relationship is with the divine fire, why the Quashmalin come to the world with their missions. We'll get into what they are. And really, what is the point of... I guess it's really why do Prometheans even exist? Because, I mean, sure, okay, there are other beings, you could say, in the world, in the Chronicles of Darkness, which are similar-ish to Prometheans, but why are Prometheans what they are? Why does the divine fire speak to them? Why are they these entities that are powered by it? That's
There's some interesting crossover potential here, specifically with Changeling or Demon as well.
Oh, of course.
Depending on how the storyteller is like, well, it's divine fire. Is it divine?
I think there's a hell of a lot of a crossover between them and Mummy.
There's Mummy also has a big crossover potential here as well. But Pyros is, I kind of describe it as the that spark.
Yeah.
Because whether or not it's classed as like divine in the Chronicles of Darkness is very much up to the storyteller.
Yes. Okay. Then, God, we're gonna have to move a little bit quicker on the after. We're getting into this stuff deep. Yeah. Okay. So the last refinement we've got is phosphorum, which is the refinement of phosphorus. So or ephemerality. So they're also called the light bringers. So what's this about? This is
the fake it till you make it.
This is the fake it till you make it one.
This is go out there, go big, go hard, go strong, try everything all at once, all the time.
Wow.
Take all the pleasure in life and get through that path.
Cool.
Experience everything, which is really interesting.
Or burn out
burn out.
Yeah. Either get there fast or get there not at all and leave a horrible disfigured corpse on the side of the road.
Excellent. Okay, so that's the refinements. In this as well, there's another thing you can add in, which are the athanors, which are these kind of objects which can help you along your pilgrimage. They contain the memories and feelings and emotions, and essentially can act as kind of a mentor, but from someone in history or from range.
It's a holocron.
It's the holocron.
Yeah, there we go. It's a holocron. Excellent. But that's kind of cool because also, as part of your pilgrimage, you could create one of these, and that's kind of cool. You can also do it in a negative way, can't you? You could actually pour all your pain and hate and anguish into it, which is
a Sith holocron.
A Sith holocron. But that's a good point of reference. Okay, so we have a sense of what we are, but what can we do in the game? So what makes Prometheans quite different to, say, werewolves and so forth?
It's worth noting here, I'm going to jump slightly ahead. It's worth noting here that as we were talking about refinements in the path of this character trying to become human, you don't use the mortal sheet.
No. Yeah, you're right. You don't start off as a human and apply a template. Yeah. You just build the character as you want and as a Promethean from the start, and that offers some different flexibility to your character. I mean, you don't have to think about that life path, as it were, to your character and why they got embraced, or why did they awaken, or why did one of the true Fae steal them away. Other things, like Prometheans are pretty hard to kill, aren't they? They're really tough.
They're really tough. Their endurance is. I believe when I was first writing for Night Horrors, that was actually a point of Prometheans can be killed, but it really depends on who they're facing and how many people are. They can get killed by a mob, but if you're down to 1-1, no, they're extremely hard to kill.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun to play a character like that. Of physically, you can be really strong and endure so much.
And even death is not that straightforward for them.
No, it's not.
They wake up on the banks of the rivers in the underworld, right, and journey back with their soul. Or at least that was in first edition. I remember that.
Second, I think they left it open. I've also seen people do it as crossovers, where if there was a character death, then they bring in Promethean that way. Of somebody may have used their corpse or something. Yeah,
that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. That's really cool. So they're pretty hard to kill. They can regenerate quite easily.
They can regenerate, yeah.
And that's when they get empowered by lightning or fire or the relevant element, I believe. I remember that from first edition.
I know lightning was a big one. I know it used to be, and I'd have to look to see if this is second edition. It used to be that a Promethean could attempt to do certain things at risk of causing a firestorm or a wasteland. But the bright side of those, as horrible as those are, is that you can regenerate and gain more power. So there's some fun things of like, how much do I want to risk, and does this clear some condition or some situation that I might need this for?
But that's very thematic, because obviously that represents that you're going to have to get that crucible hot enough to get all the impurities out to refine it to the next.
But if you get it too hot,
yeah, exactly. In other words, all the analogies to chemistry and so forth are built into the
mechanics, which I agree.
Yeah. So as you're building your character, you're going to be picking their refinement, you'll be picking their lineage, and as you do that, you then get to the Elpis and their torment. So these are essentially the same as, these take the place of virtue and vice, and essentially what is the thing that draws you to wanting to be human? What is it about humans that you covet? What is it that you go, I want that's what I want to feel or enjoy, and draws you on the pilgrimage? Whereas the torment is the opposite of that, and the thing that distracts you or scares you off and diverts you off the pilgrimage. So those essentially are your virtue and vice there, that they're going to be the things that's going to help you get back your willpower in the game, etc. Then you've got bestowments. So these are the inherent abilities based upon your lineage, and so they're not powered by Pyros. They are essentially an inherent part of how you were created. And so again, each lineage has 2 bestowments you can pick the powers between.
They're fairly static, yes. So they are based on sort of a consequence of how the Promethean was created.
Yeah. And then the next thing in your character creation, once you've picked your bestowments, is you're going to be picking, based upon your refinement, you're going to be picking your transmutations. So these are the cool powers point that we get to, because each transmutation grants you've got transmutations and you've got alembics within that. So how does that work? What's that structure of powers?
It's a little bit slightly more complicated in 2nd edition, because you're expected to move across refinements.
Yeah.
But a transmutation is often dynamic, that you can have the different ones, but you can also, once you've mastered a certain amount of them, you can kind of make them more static or permanently have them. So if you cross refinements, you still have those abilities. Right. I cannot remember, unfortunately, the difference between an individual alembic and the transmutation. But I know that there's that processing them so that they stick in essentially what is the Promethean's working memory. So you keep them as you move across refinements instead of losing them completely. Yeah,
so in other words, I think you can only learn alembics while you're on a particular refinement, and if you swap over, then you're going to start learning different.
Unless you calcify them, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. That you would have to make the effort to calcify them.
And you don't have to learn them in a linear way, which is nice. That means it is really about, and that again, I guess that really represents the fact that it is that kind of like chemistry, that you're jumping between refinements, you're learning something new that you add to your soul, as it were.
There's definitely that thematic version of experimentation, and the journey is what's important, because you're expected to move around. Yes.
Yeah. But that means there's a lot of opportunity to make characters that feel quite different depending upon how you've collected those powers and how you use them together, which is that's fun. That's rather than being like, oh, I'm just gonna have to go up the ranks of a discipline, or I mean it's not as freeform as mage, but then that's mage's shtick. But then obviously the upside of mages having lots of freeform, the downside is they're still only human, whereas a Promethean may not have the whole bag of tricks, but you can throw a car at them and they'll get up and still beat you to a bloody pulp.
With the car.
With the car, in fact. With the car. So I think to wrap up then, let's think about what we can explore, like what within the big theme of the game, about what this is. Because I mean, ultimately, we're playing created beings that normally want to become human, but
I'm going to collapse. Yeah, I'm actually going to collapse a couple of these in the notes, because the first note is about Promethean is about becoming human, but what happens if the character decides becoming human is not worthwhile to them?
Yeah,
for whatever reason. And that's where you get things like the Pandorans or the Sentimani.
Yeah.
Sentimani or Prometheans have given themselves to flux and change and chaos. But with Prometheans, what happens if they're like, I'm not human, and maybe I become okay with that, or maybe I'm enduring this crisis of what passes for faith of, do I want to be human anymore? That's where those kind of can be explored really well with that.
I think that's a really good topic within a game, because this ties back to the whole thing of, like, you know, sometimes the worst monsters in Chronicles of Darkness and in World of Darkness, the worst monsters are humans. It's not the vampires, it's not the werewolves. The worst monsters are regular humans doing horrible things, not because they're cursed, not because of some other thing, not because they have some taint within them. It's just because they're horrible people. And that's a potentially, you know, coming to that, how you deal with that thought process as an entity that was wanting to become human is a really interesting kind of philosophical point to role play around.
Right. And you can have stories in which, like where an entire town can go against Promethean, or the entire town ends up sort of destroying itself. Not necessarily, some of it might be due to the Promethean disquiet, but a lot of it might just be aggravating what's already there, right? Mm-hmm. Petty rivalries and spite and fear. And that's just that theme ongoing is, you know, humans sometimes are the worst monsters. How do you deal with it?
I guess that gets us to how the play style is the road trip, right? Yeah. So, as putting this is like, you know, it's the Incredible Hulk TV series and also like animated cartoon series where, you know, the Hulk, you know, Bruce Banner goes somewhere, does good things for some reason. Someone's being an ass, he gets angry about it, lashes out, and then can't stay because, you know, he's being hunted by, you know, Thunderbolt Ross or some other group. But that's the point, you know, it's, you can't stay, you can do something somewhere and do some good perhaps, but you're always going to have to move on.
Right. So the media inspirations like Western style shows or movies of the stranger who comes into town, right? Supernatural is a very good one. Yeah. I found in the X-Files, same idea.
It's funny you mentioned, sorry, I'll just jump in quickly. It's funny you mentioned Supernatural, because there's a really good episode, I think it's even season 1, where they have a Frankenstein monster type entity, and they, when fighting against it, they realize, I think they find its journal because it's stealing organs from people to improve to repair its body, and the realization there's nothing supernatural about it. It's all just misunderstood or not well understood kind of science. And so if you watch that episode, it's great. They never go back to it. They only go back to it once about that idea and never come back to it again. And I was never come back again. Yeah. It was like, that's such a wasted opportunity. Anyway, Crystal.
So I was going to say that Promethean lends itself well to being like a one-player game or like a very small Chronicle where you only have like 2 players, maybe 3, because there's a lot of like self-exploration that you can do with the characters built already into the game, and that you don't have to have other players or a big group involved in order to explore some of those things, because of the fact that Prometheans are really hard to kill, and they do have some inherent strength and stuff like that about them just due to the nature of what they are. So it lends itself very well to being a smaller game.
does it also? I think it also potentially lends itself well to a game where you have a Promethean character, but the rest of the characters are rotating, kind of not rotating cast, but it's a different cast each week, as it were. Like you're in a new town, you're playing the only people who are the people that help it or require the help of the Promethean, and then the tragedy is ultimately those player characters mostly end up going, we hate you because of the disquiet, but you go through that process each time and see how many iterations of it and variations you can get. And then, but that also means each week you could go, hey, I'm going to play a vampire this week because the Promethean meets a vampire when they end up in one city. And next week they go, oh, it's the werewolf. So it gives you that kind of, what would I say? It kind of feels like an anthology, but also like an ensemble at the same time.
Yeah, it's more like an anthology where you're following a character through different sort of scenarios.
And you can follow characters. Like you could easily have a Promethean and a mage character go into town. Like it's very much a smaller group or an ensemble cast in the sense of you have an anthology that changes. Not ensemble as in a large main cast, but just in kind of in terms of what you encounter can change. So
it can also be that like players who want to play Promethean only come in when they're needed and go off on their own, and then the player can play something else too.
It's very easy to do that with Promethean.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's really interesting. And I see in the show notes someone mentioned Silent Hill style stories. I'm interested in that because like Silent Hill.
Oh yeah, because of the emphasis on philosophy and kind of what disquiet can do, especially if somebody's there for a long time. I mentioned Silent Hill specifically because I believe it's in the first edition. The fiction in the core book goes into Centralia and what happened there in the coal fires. So it talks about maybe some things were the result of disquiet, or some things a town, a Promethean comes to town, even if they don't stay very long, disquiet can still affect the town and make existing rivalries worse just by their presence.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So it's the catalyst for something, ancient secrets, or there's other monsters there that get antagonized by its presence. Exactly. Yeah,
that's kind of what I was looking for that analogy there.
Interesting. Okay, so we've mentioned the Centimani and Pandorans, so let's delve into a bit more about them. So Pandorans are the result of failed attempts at creating a Promethean. So on the very final, acts of imbuing this body with the divine fire, essentially. I guess it kind of goes out of control, spasms, mutates. It's very body horror, falls apart, quivering masses of flesh that kind of just become little horrible creatures that hunger for Pyros. And that's a bad thing because A, they hunger for Pyros and they're going to get it from Prometheans. And B, it's a bad thing because this very act failing is a failed milestone for a Promethean, because creating another Promethean gets them along the pilgrimage. And then the scary thing is that these little creatures can essentially be hidden away and not appear like monsters because they go inert, and they're waiting for beings like Prometheans to be nearby, so they awaken again to feed upon Pyros and essentially start, evolving further. They are really body horror monsters.
I thought the scary thing about them was the "there but for the grace of God go I" aspect.
That's the philosophical aspect of it. Very much is a "there but for the grace of God go I," especially if you're running it, depending on where you're running it in the Chronicle, because you can have Prometheans wake up essentially next to a failed one. You can have a Pandoran in the vicinity that whoever created that Promethean, that was a successful attempt, but there are other attempts by you, and now they're waking up.
Yeah, you're try number 17, and the other 16 are in this, in these oil drums over here.
Yeah. Like, ooh.
And I mean, they also exude a disquiet of causing fear and insanity in the area around them. The thing where they get really gross, and I think some of these are new things. I can't remember if these were actually in first edition. The idea that they can end up eating each other in their urge to gain more pyros and coalesce and become precipitati, which is basically just bigger, more sentient, not fully sentient creatures. More cunning, bigger, more powerful, a lot more body horror going on there. And then sublimati is like the full-on evolution of these into creatures that actually have some cunning, some you could potentially hold a conversation with. Why you'd want to, I have no idea. But I think the main thing is they are the representation of everything that goes wrong with being a Promethean. They are, the complete opposite. They are, chaos, they are complete chaos unleashed with respect to the alchemical process.
Speaking of chaos, you have the Centimani after that, which are giving themselves to that force of chaos, which is flux. They're Prometheans, they're sentient, but they've given themselves over to just that chaotic urge. And they can control Pandorans to a degree.
Yeah. That's really scary, and I think that's just where that takes the horror of Pandorans and the horror of a Promethean indulging in the chaos of how they can shape their body and do various things, and in other words gives it some direction, some cunning plans. It's one thing to go, oh, we turn up in a town and the Pandorans wake up. It's another thing when you're really being properly chased by a Centimani and their little pack of ravenous beasts. That's kind of scary.
I know that you could easily become one of them.
Yes.
It's very difficult to get out of flux if you fall into it.
Mm-hmm. And then other beings we can come across. Obviously, there is, as we said in the Chronicles of Darkness overview episode, there are all manner of ephemeral beings. Ghosts, the angels of the God Machine, spirits, cryptids, and I think cryptids would make fun interactions with Prometheans because again they're kind of weird, the weirdness of them. But then there's alchemists that we can run into. So these are the very mortals who are learning to or have created Prometheans in the past, or they're learning to do it, and of course they'll be very interested in vivisection and chopping up a Promethean and working out why they tick.
Yeah.
I think that's quite a simple, not a simple, but I think they're an interesting antagonist that is because they're quite mortal, but the thing which makes them dangerous is their knowledge of what makes Prometheans tick. And then finally, the things that are kind of like the Angels of God Machine, but are kind of not as well, is...
I really enjoy Kashmalim because they're beings that are part and made out of Aesop, that sort of divine fire, that spark. But they're very much bound to their mission, whatever they were created for. By definition, they're eldritch beings. There's no sense of morality aside from what is on their mission and what isn't. Mm-hmm. And even if the Kashmal in question, the end goal is to help the Promethean, they can do it by destruction as well. Mm-hmm. There was one specifically that I wrote in that the goal of it was to differentiate individuals from each other, which you would think is a good thing, but they're very destructive and obsessive about it. So Kashmalim are just these wonderful eldritch beings that are really fun, especially if you're doing like road trip adventures. You can kind of bring in those call outs to, Twin Peaks or Welcome to Night Vale or something, kind of have those points of reference of just, they're weird. I love them. They're great.
Because they are agents of change for the most part. Their mission is to cause change in the world, and I think that's where the fun of how they interact with, say, the infrastructure and the occult physics of the God Machine interact quite well, because I feel the God Machine feels to me much more static compared to the Divine Fire. So I think there's a lot of scope to really, look at how those elements in the world
really play with each other. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Finally, we're going to do this quite quickly. Who we can meet, because crossover is, of course, really quite easy in Chronicles of Darkness. So we're going to go down the list of fun crossover bits that we've got here. So Prometheans with Mummy, I think, is an interesting one, because in some respects I feel they're both created beings, because mummies can also, when they die, be like have a body made ready for their soul to go into, and they represent almost two paths to kind of the same endpoint. Prometheans are trying to become human, and a mummy is trying to remember that they were human and deal with eldritch entities, in which are the gods of the underworld and the duat. So I think there's a lot of interesting crossover there, and possibly understanding how Sekhem interacts with the world might be quite enlightening for a Promethean. I don't know, anyone else have some ideas on that one?
I think especially if they're encountering like one Promethean encountering maybe a mummy, there's some very interesting crossover potential with them, and like you said, they're already animated from the dead.
Mm-hmm. Demon is really, again, looks at the whole trying to fake being a human, I guess, because they're both definitely don't start out as humans, and demons can create patchwork identities, covers, by making pacts with other people and taking bits of their souls, whereas so that's funny, because a Promethean's trying to refine a soul, and a demon is nabbing little bits to patchwork over its own to go, I'm a human, really, don't look at me, God Machine, trust me, I'm a human. So I think that's really curious, but I think it also leads to some very some antagonism, because I don't know how a Promethean would feel about knowing that demons are going about taking bits of people's lives.
You can get into some really interesting philosophical territory with a demon and Promethean crossover, especially with static and change and how that might relate to the God Machine.
Yeah, what would the God Machine and its angels think of Prometheans, or would it just not my circus, not my monkey kind of thing?
Storyteller. That's something to really explore in those chronicles, I think. I think that would be a lot of fun, personally. I
personally think that there's scope for that. A God Machine would likely find Prometheans there, that I think that kind of like that bug in the code kind of problem. Like you're not expecting, because they are they are born from the Divine Fire, which is raw change and chaos. I don't think the God Machine would respond very well to a Promethean appearing and disquiet, causing problems with the infrastructure that it's building up.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what I was thinking. Would the God Machine send out angels to get this guy out of town?
Yeah.
Now I want a Promethean that's like a God Machine philosopher, like trying to just like research the God Machine and figure out like what in the world is this and how can I connect it to a human soul and all of that's like, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, that gets really deep when you start adding in mages into that, because, of course, how mages interact with the God Machine is another huge question. Is the God Machine part of the plan of the Exarchs? Is it some other outer eldritch entity that is playing with the cage that the Exarchs created? But Promethean, the really interesting thing with this is that, because when a Promethean becomes human, they can potentially keep some of their abilities that they had as a Promethean. So that's one thing that's already really curious. You could eventually become a human with some supernatural powers still. But then, can a Promethean that's become human awaken and become a mage? So that's a huge arc to play through. and what that means, I have no idea. What does the divine fire make of that? Like
I think that Prometheans, on a whole, those who succeed in making it through all down their path and become human, I think that they are more likely than anybody else to awaken.
Yeah,
because they're already on this philosophical road. They're asking, what does it mean to become human? What does it mean to be a human? And if they just keep asking those questions, yeah, maybe eventually they'll get to one that wakes them up to the true nature of reality.
That poor seer of the throne that thinks, oh, I've got all my counter magic, there's nothing you can do. And the mage throws out, well, hold on a minute, I've got this ability which is all alchemical based and is still bound within my body, and obviously lays a smackdown using that somehow. That's obviously awesome. Promethean and Changeling.
I'm not going to feel bad for the seers of the throne.
No, I'm
sorry.
not either. No, never. They're ultra bastards. We've already said they're ultra bastards. Changelings. I think there's a lot of affinity between Prometheans and Changelings. In the sense that I think a Promethean would look at because a changeling soul is like they've tried to gather it back, whereas a Promethean is obviously trying to create a soul. And I don't think Prometheans, especially ones that are really looking to become human, would look favourably at all on True Fae or any changeling that works for them. I think Prometheans would quite happily beat the living crap out of the Huntsman. Also, the fetch. The fetch, yeah. I don't know who wrote that into it. Yeah, fetches seem quite similar to Prometheans. That's for sure.
Yeah, they really are. They're the person left behind when a changeling is stolen, and I would like to see, can they become a created? Can they?
Are they? I mean, maybe I could definitely see a chronicle take that point up and be like, well, maybe let's talk about this particular changeling and their fetch that was meant to stand in their place, and is the fetch created? Maybe maybe there's a traveling Promethean that's really interested in this. Follows the fetch around. I mean, yeah, like there's lots of kind of things you can do with that.
Could a fetch, by some means, by some way of, I don't know, even just getting a very small drop of pyros in them, start their own internal crucible, so they go from being sticks and twigs and leaves and starts becoming something more than that.
Entirely. I think that could be really fun to play through.
That would definitely be fun to play through. I would love that.
Vampires and beasts. I don't know about Prometheans. I don't know how a Promethean would feel.
That really depends.
Because as we said, vampirism is you're a husk of a soul and you're now dead in essence, and beasts are about what. May well be talking about to Prometheans go, why be human? I think they both represent kind of warnings and are kind of potentially could be amazing antagonists as Prometheans find them repulsive. But at the same time, I think a Promethean talking to a vampires of the Ordo Dracal, who are also doing alchemy of the soul.
Yeah. I was going to say it really depends, and if you have a lore, I don't say a lore-based vampire, but if you have a vampire like the Ordo Dracal, or one that is a lore hunter, basically, that would be a valuable resource. But it could go either way. Of that resource could be very antagonistic, or it could be a very valuable resource. It really depends on the rest of how that's set up.
I like to imagine a vampire chronicle where the Prometheans' disquiet screws up the status quo that the vampires have all been very delicately maintaining, because the Promethean comes to town,
gone,
and now I'm just pissed at that guy over there. I'm going to go burn his shop to the ground.
Yeah,
done. No more subtlety.
Carmen's there going, finally.
Yeah,
the revolution.
Ranks and the favors and like blackmail that you get in a vampire game, and then just have like a Promethean come to town and wrecking it.
Oh man, I could also see Promethean being like, once I turn human, I need to hide from those guys. And being like super pissed if they get embraced. Like just the most spiteful vampire ever.
Finally had it.
Promethean and Geist, I think, is really interesting because this goes back to the fact that Prometheans are very hard to kill. Can come back from the dead. At least that was so in first edition. It relates all to do with the rivers of death, and I feel there's an interesting play about with, especially again, sirens and Sinitas, and essentially what it means to die and come back. It may even relate to. You could get some really interesting things about a Promethean and the ghosts of the people that they've been made from. So that
yes, especially if you're playing an Olgan Promethean, there's definitely some fun things you could do with Geist.
And of course, Olgan allows you to have crossover with Werewolf to do with animism and spirits there. And again, they're two supernatural creatures that cause revulsion in humans, like werewolves cause the lunacy in people when they go full Garou on people. And then I've put finally here, like, ultimate power team. My ultimate power team of crossover is a Siren Promethean, a Mechet Vampire, a Sin Eater, a Mummy, and a Morris Mage. That's go full death all the time, and they're just trying to explore what's it mean to be dead and come back, and put them up against some really interesting, like, super team of antagonists, like, the gods of the Duat. So go with what are they called? I can't remember. They're called the Deceived, and a Centimani would be terrifying together. And add into that mix, like, a Kerberos from the Underworld. Yeah. And some ghosts. That just sounds like a nightmare kind of scenario where you need that team to deal with it.
Also, I just think it'd be interesting for that Assyrian on this power team to learn about what it means to be alive by studying death.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially depending on, like, if you have like a Maros Mage, or there's lots of things you can do there. And I'm really fond of those type of stories, but it really depends on how you want to do it.
And I think there's a lot of mileage to see how Prometheans react to the Contagion from Contagion Chronicles, because I feel like that theme of Contagion and the leftover kind of waste of the God Machine becoming kind of like almost sentient, or at least going out of control, again feels rather anathema to the pilgrimage of a Promethean and that idea of refinement. So I feel that's a really interesting kind of anchor point maybe for your chronicle. And the last thing I've got on here, the other kind of super team, is a Promethean who finds that band of hunters but who by some means can deal with the disquiet, and so it means you do have kind of your Hulk amongst the Avengers kind of deal, depending upon which group of hunters you go for, because which one is it is it the, I can't remember which hunter group it is that steals bits and things from other supernatural creatures and grafts it onto their agents. I don't remember that group, but that would also be really interesting crossover. I think we're running out of time and I don't want to go on too long, so I'm not going to go into Dark Eras because, again, there's lots. But there are, again, as always, go look at the Dark Eras books. There are some Dark Eras story ideas there are specifically for Promethean, like the Renaissance. I think there's definitely a Renaissance one for Promethean somewhere. Likewise, there are going to be some Dark Eras that have crossover between certain factions. So you'll have Promethean maybe with Mage, or Promethean with Demon. But that's definitely worth looking into. The one thing we didn't put on this list is Deviant. Because I've not played Deviant yet, and so I don't know it well enough. But again, Deviants are like on the run. So them on a road trip with Prometheans. Prometheans are on a road trip because they can't stay anywhere. A Deviant's on the run because someone's chasing them. That sounds like awesome.
It could be the same person too. It could be an experiment gone. Like, it could be the same.
Oh my gosh! It sounds like something from like Cannonball Run or something.
Excellent. Have we covered everything there? Is there any final comments that anyone would like to make about Promethean? Because it's the one game. It's one of the games in Chronicles of Darkness I've yet to play. Because as the always storyteller with everything, with any game, I don't have time for all the games in the world, so I haven't got round to running this one yet. So, any final comments?
No
final comments.
I think we covered everything.
Yeah. As always, I think we have. Brilliant.
It is on the Storyteller's Vault. It is open for Storyteller community content.
Yep.
Yeah, as always. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. And I think actually, speaking of that, I think there's our secret frequency files. There's one which has got about the alchemist, Johannes Kunkel, in Berlin. He is the ghost with the ruby eyes. He, as a character in a historical setting, might well be a very good demiurge for Promethean. So that could be something to look at. Just as a plug for something that we've written. Anyway, so to finish up, Katriel, where can they, if people want to know more about your work or what things can they buy on the Storyteller's Vault, is there anything you would like to plug?
On the Storyteller's Vault, I don't have my Promethean outline yet. I'm still refining that. Haha, no pun intended. But I do have an Exalted one-shot on there.
Cool.
It's called An Island Imbued, and you're playing a bunch of Dragon-Blooded who are not Exalted, and it's sort of a way to get people interested in that system, all exaltation on the table. So it's mostly something I made for my own convenience, because trying to explain Exalted to people who had never played it, there's a little bit more buy-in sometimes. I run it at convention shows. Promethean is the one I was running, but it takes a little bit more time, as we were talking about before the session, so I'm still sort of refining that. You can find my stuff on Storyteller's Vault, DM's Guild, Drive-Thru, for various companies. Most likely, it's Onyx Path, High Level Games, and I did a short story in the Freeport setting with Green Ronin, and Nisaba Press.
Cool.
So that's where you can find me, or on Twitter. Which is a bunch of everything all at once. So you'll see me talking about tabletop accessibility also, along with a whole bunch of other things.
We will include all of that in the show notes when this episode goes out in a month's time on the podcast. So it'll all be in there. Cool. And then finally, obviously, if you want to get in contact, darkdaysradio@gmail.com, Facebook, Dark Days Radio, Instagram and Twitter at Dark Days Radio. You can find previous episodes of this and everything else on YouTube as well. You can find everything, all the audio versions of this. You will find the audio version of this all on www.darker-days.org, so the podcast. And then, of course, there's always our Discord, where you can go there and continue the conversations there about these games, Chronicles of Darkness, World of Darkness, and any other horror RPGs and RPGs in general. Right, but I think that is pretty much everything. So, Katriel, thank you for leading us through this. Have someone that knows the game line, or a lot more experience with the game line than I do, for sure. And Chigg and Chris, again, thank you for co-hosting and helping with the notes and leading us through this game, which I feel it feels my take on it is it feels less intimidating than first edition, if that makes sense. I feel there's a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely.
I read first edition. Yeah, I read first edition and then read second. I was just like, oh, now I see why they made some changes in second. Because
right, yeah,
it's already a game that requires a little bit more buy-in and sort of parsing through it. And the changes in second edition, I think, really helped make it a little bit less intimidating.
Yeah, that's what's up.
Quite a lot, yes.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, that's everything. So we'll be back in a month's time, and we definitely will be doing Werewolf then. So hopefully all things work out. I will have on Chris Allen to talk about Werewolf the Forsaken, because Werewolf is pretty cool. And again, second edition brought in loads of cool new stuff, and we're going to chat about that. But goodbye for now, and we'll see you in a month's time for that. Obviously, stay tuned for more episodes of the podcast soon. So bye-bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
This has been an episode of Darker Days Radio. Special thanks to Occam's Laser for the intro, outro, and new bumper music from their hit album, 9 Circles. Check out the rest of their work at occamslaser.bandcamp.com.